Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the podcast. I am very fortunate to be joined this evening by Mr. Matt Phifer of Matt Phifer Coaching. Matthew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be on. I've been following you for a while. This is like a dream come true.
Thank you, sir. What your story is? How did you end up talking about this subject?
I think like everyone who ends up talking about this at a high level, you kind of back into it, and so you don't even realize that you're. I went to school to become a therapist. I have a master's in clinical mental health counseling. I didn't realize at the time that I was trying to fill a void that I had that I didn't even realize. I mean, when you grow up with a void, you don't even realize that you have it at the time. And naturally, I had a string of bad relationships, but it was more than just bad relationships. It was, I found myself in bad, toxic work environments, and just really couldn't put those pieces back together, not really understanding what the situation was. And of course, you hear all the terms that, you're the common denominator, and you get that, but you don't even really quite understand what that actually means or how to fix it. And, you don't even realize that you're in this bubble of people who are enabling certain behavior, certain people-pleasing, codependent behavior, and they want to enable that because they like that boundaryless lifestyle that you're living. And so, long story short, so as I'm going through school to finish up, and my first job outside of once I graduated school was in addictions as a substance use therapist. And I was avoiding it like the plague. I went to school to work with couples and with families, like a lot of other marriage and family people. And I was avoiding it like the plague, but actually ended up falling in love with it. And I learned so much. It was like drinking water from a fire hose at the time, because there were people that were court mandated to come see me. A lot of them not only struggled with addiction, some of them were people with narcissistic personality disorder. I was working with codependents and was drinking water from the fire hose. And when I left and I kind of went and left traditional therapy, I did, so what's interesting is before COVID, doing Zoom calls and treating people over Zoom was like taboo, but I knew it was something that I wanted to do. I talked to mentors.
Was it taboo? Like, nobody told me, mate. I was doing it for years.
Yeah, it was absolutely taboo. They were like, you can't do that with a license. You can't take insurance. I was like, well, then screw insurance. I don't want to do it then. I just, I don't, I felt like I knew and I felt like there was people that needed help and couldn't or wouldn't go into a traditional clinic setting. And so ended up leaving and started, and all along, I'm kind of on my own healing journey of codependency and that sort of thing, and started learning concepts of self-love and setting boundaries. And I'm teaching this. And so, I'm building myself up also. Well, fast forward a couple of years, I'm in DC. Just had a horrific breakup at the time. And that was kind of like the final straw. And I really, really excelled with, taking care of myself, self-love, setting better boundaries, that sort of thing. And so I didn't realize how much I had actually learned, not only through school, but my personal experience. And then also, but that time period when I was a substance use therapist, finding out and realizing that the same part of the brain that was dealing with addiction deals with toxic relationships, not just any addiction. It's most commonly paralleled with heroin addiction. And when I started putting all these pieces back together, things really, really started to take off. And I got invited to a podcast really similar to this. I was initially just doing like your traditional online, dating coaching, initially. And then
how long ago was that?
This was probably about 4 or 5 years ago at this point.
Okay. So it was mainly dating advice.
Mm-hmm. And then someone asked me specifically about, toxic relationships, and I answered it. I had a lot of knowledge that I didn't really even realize that I really had, and it went viral. and it, went viral all over YouTube. And so they invited me back the next week, and same thing happened. Went viral. People started asking me all sorts of questions. I was like, you know what? I need to see where this goes, where this road leads. And from there, just kind of, you kind of find a niche and you kind of start to go with it. And fast forward, I got on TikTok. People really started to gravitate and started making skits, and things really started to take off from there.
How long have you been on TikTok for?
A little over a year now. So I was on it. So I'll say active for a little over a year. So I've been doing this since before I was on TikTok. A lot of people thought I got on TikTok to talk about it, but I was already active with helping people out. And so I got on TikTok, and what's interesting about TikTok, what a lot of people don't know is that when the pandemic started, that part of the year is what, if you ask a divorce lawyer, that's considered divorce season, at least in the States.
You mean like March, April time? That's divorce season?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's because people are getting their income taxes and they're using it towards, it's their last time to file, is what they'll typically say to each other. And for a lot of people who are in an abusive, toxic relationship, they're planning on taking like that big, large income tax and going to pay for a lawyer. Well, the problem is that obviously, I'm sure you share with your people that you don't tell people that are abusive and toxic that you're leaving until you're already gone if you help it. Well, a lot of people were in the middle of a divorce, living with people. Then the pandemic hits. Now you're stuck, and you just told this person, and all the courts are now shut down. Now you're trapped with this person that now knows that you want to leave, and everyone's like, oh shit, right? Now, not only that problem, you have a problem number two. The therapists were also scrambling. We're not allowed to see people via Zoom. No one knew what to do, right? So then you have this guy on TikTok that's like kind of rogue, right? That has a therapy background, that has the knowledge on toxic relationships, how to set boundaries, what to do in these type of situations. And so, everyone, because of the pandemic, also gravitated towards TikTok. I started making a couple of videos. I initially just got on there for comedy, and then I started introducing comedy with some of the skits and making them entertaining and educational all at the same time. And things just completely exploded.
Tell everybody how many followers you have now on TikTok.
820,000 at this point.
Inside of 1 year.
So, yeah. So I'm assuming that we'll crack the 1 year mark at some point in time. I also had a podcast I have a podcast that's doing well, but the podcast predated me on TikTok. And so that kind of helped transition things as well, because people knew me from the podcast and also from Instagram as well.
What's the name of your podcast so people can find that?
Toxic to Triumph.
Toxic to Triumph. Okay. And the TikTok that you have, what's that called?
Matt Phifer Coaching.
I'll put all the links in the more information bar. It's just as people go.
And that's, yeah, when you type in, if you Google Matt Phifer Coaching, everything except for my podcast is Matt Phifer Coaching. You'll pretty much find everything you need.
So you already had a background in drugs counseling, and you were already a therapist before you specifically got into narcissism. And did you say it was this particular podcast that went viral that had you talking more about narcissistic abuse and codependency?
Yeah, because, I was talking about dating. I would talk about it here and there, but when when it really started to go viral and people were really gravitating it, and I mean, people were, calling me like crazy after this podcast I did. And I was a regular guest on this podcast. They still have it. It's called Fly, Nubian Queen. And it's, pretty much do go on Facebook and YouTube on a variety of topics in the Black community. And so people were really flocking to it, and, their numbers were really jumping. And so I was like, you know what, it's obviously a need that a lot of people need. And so let me let me see where this road leads. And so I'm gonna talk about it here and there in relation to individuals who were coming out of a toxic relationship, but I never really presented it the way that I have been, and really with a regular focus on it the way that I do now.
Okay. So the that particular podcast was, sorry, what was the name of the podcast again?
Fly Nubian Queen.
Fly Nubian Queen, and that was about 4 years ago, you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so just spontaneously, it's similar to my story. I didn't want to really talk about this stuff. It's just I released a video on it, and then everybody chewed my arm off to get more. And I was like, well, I don't know about it. I guess I better. Yeah. I told people, I was like, I don't know. I only found out what borderline personality disorder was about 5 years ago. It's not. It wasn't my bag. It's not my. It wasn't my thing. Then I realized it was much more of a part of my life than I'd known before.
I was actually avoiding it like the plague, because if I'm being honest with some of my personal experience, you know how it is as a guy. You don't want to share your personal experience. You're embarrassed. I mean, and then again, when I got on TikTok, there's a lot of men who talk about it openly now, but I really, was avoiding, just being, a little bit more closed off, where, men don't like talking and sharing, especially on the codependent side, right? That, I allow for people to use me and this and that. And people don't like opening up about stuff like that. And so it grew to, it got to a point where I was like, just screw it. People need it. And so here we are.
It's changed a lot since 2015, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You can definitely talk about it more. So have you shared with your followers online the experiences that you've had in as a codependent in these relationships? Have you already told them?
Yes and no. When I'm online on a large platform, I kind of filter a lot out. When I'm talking to like a smaller group, I might be a little bit more open and more forthcoming. Because for me, it hit home with So where I take responsibility for my healing is that there were people that weren't necessarily narcissistic that I had a problem with because of my own lack of boundaries. And so there was a lot of chaos that I had in my life because of, so I talk about it, I'm open with the fact that that I lack a lot of boundaries, that there was a lot of times I was taken advantage of when I shouldn't have been. Some of it was on me. Some of it was on people that were narcissistic and toxic. But with a smaller group, I get a little bit more in detail of what that looked like.
Okay. I've never really discussed it either. Maybe one day in the future we should do a podcast where we actually talk as men about, well, the taboo that women don't realize is basically when we sit there and we tell our stories, we're just saying, I'm a really shit man, I'm a really shit man, I'm a really shit man. Because that's below the cultural standard of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the boundary setters. And it's like saying, I'm a simp. Do you tell your story?
Yeah,
and you're like,
absolutely.
Simp.
One of the other reasons why I don't is even if someone has mistreated me, not throwing them under the bus. I think that everyone should have a not. I think that at some point in time that becomes a borderline smear campaign. Back on them if you're talking about what someone else has done to you and things like that. So I'm very very conscious and very aware of not engaging in the same behavior that was done to me. So. But when it's a smaller group, I feel like it's a little bit more intimate, where I can talk a little bit more, give a little more intimate details.
That's very conscientious and cautious of you, Matt. I don't see much of that conscientiousness and cautiousness out there. What I typically see is people just declaring that their partner is a narcissistic psychopath, and that's the end of that. And just as you say, throwing them under the bus, denouncing them effectively, dehumanizing them and condemning them. But you're concerned to not do that because it has been done to you.
I think anyone who's dealt with a narcissist has gone through a smear campaign. I've been through a couple. I'm actually going through one right now for calling someone out online. But I think that the other thing about when you start going down that road is that you have to think about the other people that it impacts. So a lot of times people are only thinking about the narcissist, but they're not thinking about the narcissist children. They're not thinking about the innocent people involved. That, yeah, that person might be a shit person. However, right, if you take them down, right, what ripple effect does that actually have? As big of a shit person as that person might be. So, allow for that person to be, allow for them to do what they need to do. And, I'm also, even though at this point, I can tell someone who's narcissistic and things like that. However, there's a lot of other toxic behavior that causes people to act that way. And so, one of them being codependent, right? Someone can be codependent and be very controlling and have a lot of resentment, and people think that this person is a covert narcissist. And then they end up getting the help, and now you're over here slamming them, right? When this person has now kind of seen the light down the road, and now you have these residual effects. So at some point in time, the chaos has to stop. And so you can either choose to be the one to stop it and to live a better life and to allow for your life to be, this light that shines in darkness, so to speak, or you can continue that chaos and see these ripple effects. And I don't think that does anyone any good.
Would you be happy to talk about the stories anonymously without naming the person? But you'd be happy to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I won't ask you to do it if I'm not doing it myself, of course. It would have to be it would have to be both of us. It would be quite scary because I've never done it. With moving around a lot, you said that there's an ADHD element to that, and then you went on to say that there's an ADHD element to the typical victim of narcissistic abuse. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, there's a lot of links between people who struggle with ADHD, in particular if you're undiagnosed, and victims of abuse. It is a very, very common link. So if you think about it, right? So I was diagnosed later on in life. I went a great majority of my life not understanding that I had ADHD. Well, you think about someone who has ADHD, sometimes they're kind of loopy, they forget things, they space out. And think about people who are narcissistic, toxic, right? What do? They like to gaslight. They like to make you feel like you're going crazy. And so if you think about it, if you are already a space cadet and you're only picking up bits and pieces of conversations and forgetting things, and literally a disorganized person because of the struggle, and you don't even know that you have this struggle. Imagine being with a narcissist who makes you feel like you're crazy anyway, even if you didn't have ADHD, and then you already misplace things, you already forget conversations, and then they say things like, you're always misremembering things, you're always dozing out, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And you subconsciously know that you do these things anyway. So it's so hard to piece together whether or not you are the problem or not. And so with someone who struggles with codependency and undiagnosed ADHD and can't figure out where you begin and where the other person ends, it creates this environment where this person is very easily gaslit. The other problem with people who struggle with ADHD is that they're very, very sensitive to rejection and to criticism and things like that. And so you have this, this other layer on top of codependency that makes you even more sensitive and even more touchy to try to convince this person that, that you're not losing it, that you're not crazy, and that everything is fine. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize, and so both on the codependent side and on the narcissistic side, is that ADHD has the ability to look like love bombing, right? And because we can get really, really hyper focused on one person because we're excited about meeting someone new, and then all of a sudden we go into, we kind of lose out. And we start to crash on our hyperfixation. Well, naturally, someone who's narcissistic, that's going to light them up pretty quickly, and if someone is undiagnosed and if they don't know that about themselves and how to pace themselves in a relationship, then that can look like a love bomb devaluation phase in and of itself.
You said one of the points was to distinguish whether you are the problem or the other person is the problem. When you're coaching people with narcissistic abuse, is that one of the key elements in their progress and their healing, is to determine where the problem actually lies?
People ask that all the time, and people hate it when I say this until we actually begin to break it down. But I tell them that both people need work. It's not just one. This is they call it a codependent narcissistic dance. So you have one person that is constantly giving to try to fill their void, fill their need. They need to be needed, need to be wanted. They need to fix this other person. Then you have this other person that's constantly taking. Well, but both of them are basically in this dance, trying to fulfill their own needs through external validation. But neither one of them are actually getting their needs met, because neither one of them are involving any sort of self-love. So it actually creates this horrific atmosphere. And so, a lot of times when people come to me and they say, well, how do you fix the narcissist? How do you get them to therapy? How do you get to therapy? Right. And so people even ask, like, well, how can I tell if this person is truly narcissistic? The healing, finding out if they're a narcissist, whether or not this relationship can actually work, all comes down to the same thing. Are you willing to work on yourself? You only have 3 options here. You can change yourself, change your own behavior. You can accept their behavior, or you can leave the relationship and still work on yourself. And so people ask that all the time, like, is it them? Is it me? But the reality of it is that if you're in a toxic relationship, the reality of it is, especially if you're in a narcissistic relationship, both people need work, not just one. Right. I always tell people, if you snap your fingers, if I had that Thanos glove and I snap my fingers and all narcissists were, all of a sudden healed and normal, codependence would still have an issue, because now you're with someone that you can't fix and repair. So now you still have a toxic relationship.
I really thought you were going to say all the narcissists would say, I don't feel too good and disintegrate. But no, that would be my psychopathic solution. Yeah. You had a much kinder solution. How much of this do you think comes down to an effect of intergenerational trauma?
A lot of it. So a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who are dealing with trauma from their childhood, dealing with trauma from not only childhood, but also from previous relationships. They're stuck in a trauma response, whether it be a fawn response, whether it be a fight response for the narcissist. So it has a lot to do with it. And you basically have a lot of people who are walking around who are not even aware of who they are or what even really makes them tick. And so if I don't even know my own personal limits, how am I going to set limits with other people? If I have no idea what sets me off, what triggers these responses for me, you're already really behind the 8 ball on dealing with other people, not just because I talk to people not just about romantic relationships, but all sorts of relationships. I do a lot of workplace talks and speakings as well. And people who, you need to know your limits when it comes to workplace dynamics and when it comes to your children and things like that as well. And if you have no idea where your triggers lie because of your trauma and your past history and things like that, you're really setting yourself up for failure. You really have to become very self-aware of who you are. Trauma responses are not.
Yeah. As speaking as a man, everything nowadays is either speaking as this, speaking as that. Speaking as a man, how many relationships do you think you've been in with somebody who would get a clinical diagnosis for narcissistic personality disorder?
With me, there was one for sure. And there was one person that I actually really cared about. The problem wasn't necessarily her; it was her mom was the narcissist. That was the issue, and it became extremely problematic in the relationship. So, if you want to count that one, but definitely 100%, there was one that without question. I've had good relationships, I've had bad relationships. But the one that would get that clinical diagnosis, that was off the chains.
Okay. What kind of effects did you notice in yourself? Because obviously you're experiencing narcissistic abuse. There's usually symptoms that go with it. What kind of effects did you start seeing in yourself?
I think one of the most common ones, the walking on eggshells feeling. Okay. The questioning of yourself. One of the things that happens in these type of, that's common that not a lot of people talk about is your body begins to break down because of the because of the cognitive dissonance, because of that walking on eggshells feeling. Your body already knows, and so it's trying to warn you, and it goes into hyper alert, kicking and screaming, letting you know, like, get us the fuck out of here. And but because you're staying, your body begins to break down in an attempt to try to warn you. So I started noticing myself get sick, walking on eggshells feeling, not sleeping at night. It was just, it was absolute headaches, a lot of horrific things, and it started to impact my relationship with other people. Started to impact my relationship with my kids. Started to impact my relationship with friends. You start to isolate, and all in an attempt to try to save a relationship that's actually causing you harm.
Yeah. How did you feel being in that position, given that you had a background in psychology and you were working as a mental health professional? Did that make it worse?
That made it horrible. Yeah. It was very, a lot of internal shame, that I should have known this. And I'm that part I'm actually more open about now. And a lot of other therapists have actually come forward and said, yeah, this was me too. But I don't think you can really actually truly explain narcissistic abuse from a book or learn it from a book. I think you can learn some aspects of it, but it's one of those things, one of those rare things that you can talk about it, but you really won't actually truly understand until you actually experience it.
100%.
What we read in the book and what they taught us, and not that stuff not that it's not valuable now. I still use a lot of things that I was taught, but the experience was something completely different.
Yeah. There's no. It's very, very hard to prepare people for it. We're always talking about red flags. I see a lot of that online, and I'm like, you can learn all the red flags you want, but if you don't embody that, if you don't feel it, if you feel a different way, you can see red flags in a person, but you feel you want to be with them, you'd be like, oh, this is cute, how fucking evil they are.
Yeah. And not only that, but one of the things that you start to learn is that, we're not looking for red flags. We're looking for good, healthy people who makes us feel good, because it has to come back down to self-love, right? That we take care of ourselves, we take care of our own needs, and we learn what it feels like to feel good about ourselves first. Mm-hmm. And then when we're around people that disrupt that peace, when we have that good sense of value and that good sense of self-awareness, and we know when someone is really intentionally trying to push our limits, right? And then, we know, like, all of a sudden life literally becomes very, very easy. You can tell the difference between someone who is healthy, someone who is, we have a lot of people, I was one of them, that say, I have trust issues. Well, because you don't trust yourself to make the right decision about people. Once you learn and you become self-aware and you are able to set better, healthier boundaries, and not just set them, but execute on them, then all of a sudden it becomes very, very clear on who the toxic narcissistic people are and who it is that really, truly, actually, genuinely cares about you for the most authentic person that you are. And when you engage in self-love, it just makes it so much easier. You
said a big thing there, and you said it quickly. I I think I heard you say that when people said you have trust issues, it's not that you don't trust other people, it's that you don't trust yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, it's when we are saying, a lot of people say, I don't trust men, I don't trust women, I don't trust other people. You're really saying that you are not trusting, you can't tell the difference between people who are healthy and people who are toxic. And the reason why you know internally, subconsciously that you have the potential to be used, abused, and you're over time. At one point in time, you were overly trusting of somebody that did not earn your trust or should not have had your trust to begin with. You don't know how to even begin to tell the difference. So you just don't even enter the game. And so, but what it has to come back down to is you have to lean into that fear. What is that fear? That fear is that fear of rejection, that fear of abandonment, that fear of someone not liking you, right? Because quite often people who have trust issues, you're so concerned with this person liking you, you're not even recognizing, right? Like when we have a good sense of self-awareness, like one person I was working with, she's mentioned that she had these type of trust issues. And so we started working on boundaries. Well, one of the things that she said that as she became more self-aware is that I've never really honestly liked kissing guys on the first date. And I was like, then why do you? Well, I'm afraid that I won't be liked. I'm afraid that I'll get turned down. I'm afraid I'll get rejected. Well, if they reject you for not kissing them on the first date, they did you a favor. Right. So, now you can try the people that you can. So what ended up happening is that she started setting boundaries early and often in the beginning. Well, one guy she went on a date with and she told him right up front, just so you know, I don't kiss on the first date. I need to be home by 10, all her boundaries. And immediately this guy is like, I feel like I'm dating a 15-year-old. I can't believe, and so there's no need at that point. Once we set a boundary, all we have to do is sit back and collect data. So I'm sitting here collecting this data. This person is going off on me about a very simple, very healthy boundary that he doesn't want to be kissed on the first, that, I don't like being kissed on the first date. There's no need to go on a second date. Right. So now guess what that is? That's trust in yourself. And eventually you meet someone that you're more compatible with, that you can have that level of trust. And then you can continue to build on the trust from there.
Yeah. She probably just saved herself about 9 months. Because he was always going to do that. He was always going to push a boundary and break it. But,
absolutely,
if you start it with something small, then that's a faster way of getting the job done. Do you think there's any cultural factors here that are encouraging narcissism?
I think number one, social media. Everyone feels this pressure to be perfect all the time. Everyone wants to be the perfect parent. Everyone wants their kids to be perfect. And at the expense of what is actually good, right, and healthy, and at the expense of being authentic. At certain dynamics, narcissism is rewarded, in particular in careers like sales, marketing, places like that. When we get into, and we don't even get me started on religious trauma and how many narcissists are actually in churches and taking advantage of codependence in churches. And so there's a lot of different areas and a lot of different situations where people get taken advantage of. But unfortunately, there's a lot of, even in the workplace, there's a lot of narcissists as bosses, because they're willing to do whatever and step on whoever they need to get to the top. So there's a lot of cultural things that people just aren't aware of, that they're not paying attention to. But if you have a narcissist that's working for you, right, and they're doing whatever it is that they need to do to get to the top, and you're rewarding that behavior because they're driving you numbers, that you're not even seeing you might see how much money that this narcissist is driving you. And I'm using a sales example. You might be seeing how much money this person is making you in your sales industry, but you're also not seeing how much money you're actually losing, because this person is causing so many people to leave your organization. So you can see it all over. And then, the trolling, that's another big thing, where, there's a lot of links between people who troll online. than people who have a lot of narcissistic traits and tendencies. And so that's another area. Online trolling is another area that you see it. But guess what? Unfortunately, sometimes it gets rewarded. Because the quickest way to get rid of a narcissist is to starve them of that attention. But trolling for a lot of people is funny. They laugh at it. They get the reaction that they're looking for, even if they're not getting the reaction from the person that they're trolling. Other people start commenting down below. Oh my God, this is so funny. They start sharing it, screenshotting it. Look at what this person said. If it goes viral, then that person literally just got rewarded for narcissistic behavior. And what's going to happen? They're going to continue. There's people literally on TikTok right now that have over 1 million followers. That's literally all they do all day long. They built a following based on trolling and making fun of other people. That's all they do.
Yeah, which is effectively, it's bullying by a different name, isn't it? Do you have more female or male followers?
Followers, I have more female. It's about an 80-20 split. However, so I don't take clients anymore. When I was working with people, it was the people that I actually worked with was closer to 50-50.
So the people who actually came for coaching and counseling, that was 50-50 between men and women, but the following was 80-20.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you think there's so many more female followers than male followers, apart from the fact you're dashingly handsome?
I think that, there's several reasons. It's very common for women, they do a good job of empowering, but unfortunately, sometimes they enable. And there's a lot of as much as I talk about narcissism, there's a lot of people who, they'll challenge me on things. They'll say, I think the term narcissism is overused. And I actually agree with them that it is. And because of that, there's a lot of misinformation. For example, all narcissists cheat. So it's common for a man to cheat. And so the minute that someone does cheat, it's common for a lot of people to cheat these days. But the minute that someone cheats, everyone thinks that this person is a narcissist. Well, you might have worked with, you may have a friend, a woman may have a friend who has been cheated on by a narcissist. And as soon as she hears that someone cheated, he's a narcissist. And then it begins to spiral from there. I mean, there's so many different reasons. I mean, there might be one or two different things that happen. This person just didn't listen, or guess what? This person actually has ADHD or autism. And this person just labels them a narcissist. And I think that also it's easier to label someone a narcissist than to accept your own bad behavior of codependency and things like that. Because even in codependency, sometimes that person can look like a narcissist because you're so busy trying to please someone else that it ends up leading to resentment. And so you start getting pissed. You start thinking that everyone else is the problem. But again, it comes back down to self-awareness, not even realizing, that you are actually creating the environment for this problem to happen. And so there's a lot of different reasons why that happens. And so on one hand, women are typically, they have no problem going for help when they need help. However, they also at times can be very quick to label when they hear certain dynamics and certain traits.
You be careful, sir. I can't help you when they come for you. No, I hear you. With respect, and I talk about this in my lives whenever I go, and not to. I don't say that to invalidate anyone's feelings or anyone's experience. And as a matter of fact, I tell people the label narcissism isn't even really that big of a deal. Like, we don't have to have a diagnosis. If you're being mistreated, you're being abused and things like that, look at the behavior. That's all you really need to know. If you take an inventory of your relationship, you don't have to be a narcissist. I've met with people before, and I could tell that this person just wanted a divorce. I was like, I'm not really hearing a lot of narcissistic behavior, but if you just want a divorce, like, you're not a prisoner, and so
So there's a lot of misconception, a lot of bad information, and a lot of lack of self-awareness as well.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen a lot of intellectual sloppiness. Like people just like using it. They learn the term and they just bandy it about. And I'm like, the more you do that, the less power it has, the less meaningful it becomes. Because if everybody's a fucking narcissist, then nobody's a narcissist. It's meaningless. Totally meaningless.
Absolutely.
Do you wish that more men would follow you and maybe listen to what you have to say?
They are starting to come around. I think that more men, do I wish that more men, it's kind of a catch-22 because I do wish more men would follow me and things like that. However, that also means that there's more people with problems. And so on one hand, I enjoy having a large following. On the other hand, I don't like that there's over 800,000 people that are saying that they're in toxic relationships. But one of the things that I do hope for every man and woman is that they start to take self-love and therapy and things like that serious, right? And that people start to get the help that they actually need, whether it be to deal with childhood issues, to learn about boundaries, to learn about self-love, so then they don't, people don't understand that this is the reason why they're recycling a lot of these toxic dynamics in other relationships, that even if you weren't necessarily a toxic one in one relationship, due to, because the conditioning, because of the, past trauma, because of your childhood, you're literally just bringing that into another relationship. And even if that relationship had potential, you can literally self-sabotage that relationship because of your own lack of self-love. And what happens is that, we all have an internal need, to, for the world around us to match how we feel about ourselves internally. And if we're insecure, we lack self-love, we lack self-esteem and self-worth, we will begin to tear down and break apart the things around us, including our relationship. And so the thing that I wish for men is that we would not be so hard-headed, right? And that we could begin to open up and have these type of dialogues about what it's like to, instead of being the alpha male, right, to set healthy boundaries, what that actually looks like, what that actually feels like. And then what's weird about it is that you actually become that person that you actually want to be, that badass that you actually want to be, by setting, that emotional intelligence is actually what a lot of men are actually lacking.
But there's a way of doing it authentically and a way of doing it artificially, I think, isn't there?
Yep, absolutely.
You mentioned that the effect or when it went viral was you were doing a podcast that you were a regular guest on that was speaking mainly to the Black community in America.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been an increase in awareness? I've been doing this since 2012. I check my stats, I check my comments. Has there been an increase in awareness and interest, would you say, that you were riding the wave of anyway?
Yeah, I would. I think so. So in the Black community, mental health for a long period of time was very, very taboo. Everyone, in the Black community for decades, if you had a problem, it needed to be handled internally. It needed to be handled with a pastor. Therapy was for crazy people. There are so many different stigmas in the Black community. However, because of the internet, because of different social media platforms, what would happen is that there might be, someone like myself, for a long period of time. I didn't know for a very long time. I didn't know any other Black therapists unless they were like very far away. But because of the internet, because of social media, all of a sudden now people are able to link up, like that. So that podcast I was telling you about, I was, so a part of it, I was on a panel and there was five other Black therapists, and we were all able to talk. And that was the first time that I actually was able to sit down with other Black therapists and talk and break bread, so to speak. Now, fast forward 4 or 5 years, now I know a shit ton of them. And because everyone now has a platform, because people are able to help each other out, invite each other on each other's podcasts, support each other, and it's not as taboo. So you have a lot of people that want the help, that need the help, that will come forward. And you also have young people that are now inspired, by what they see. And they, people will ask me like, well, how do I do this? How do I, young men and young women, how do I get started down this road?
Yeah, that's healthy. That's good to say. I got asked about 6 months ago in a private chat by 4 Black American women if I would talk about the Black experience in America from a PTSD, intergenerational trauma perspective, and narcissistic abuse. And I was like, I would love to. However, I don't think I'm the man for the job at this point in history. Maybe, in 50 years we could do that. But there is that. I could see that there was that. There's that appetite there for that conversation to be had in a sort of a, what do they say, trauma-informed way. Because we can. It's not a bad way of analyzing, culture and where we're up to.
Yeah.
Just not perhaps for me to do that. So how do you, when you were working with clients, what would you usually do with them? What was your preferred modality, or do you have your own thing that you did with clients? Mostly CBT, a little bit of solutions focus. I mean, for the most part, because I was out on my own, I don't take insurance, things like that. I don't get into EMDR. I do believe in EMDR and things like that, but that's, there's other people that can do that sort of thing. But I really, one of the things that I kind of pride myself on was meeting people where they're at. So every single situation was very, very different. However, we worked a lot on self-love, a lot. Understanding what it is, understanding on how to build your self-worth, not feeling the guilt and shame for putting yourself first. Let me rephrase that. Feeling the guilt and shame and understanding how to process through that, how to process your emotions, being okay with not being okay, not feeling like you need to be perfect all the time. Allowing for yourself to be angry, allowing for yourself to feel anxiety and actually feeling your feelings and sitting there in that discomfort, understanding that the reason why it's uncomfortable is because you've been putting the needs and the feelings and the emotions of everyone else first, right? And actually feeling it in your body and actually taking responsibility for your healing, taking responsibility for your emotions, and understanding a lot of boundary work too, a lot of mental and emotional boundaries, that what someone thinks of me is none of my business. How someone, if I set a boundary and someone gets upset, it's not my responsibility to go and try to fix that. That anger that they have, they're allowed to feel angry, and I have to let go of that control and allow for them to feel that through and allow for them to take care of that on their own. And a lot of very tough, uncomfortable conversations. I got ripped apart for saying this on a video a couple weeks ago. I think I left it up there, but about how people who struggle with codependency are manipulative. Right? You're engaging, when people understand that they're engaging in manipulative behavior, and when we break it down about how so a lot of the other piece is a lot of education of the truth behind your behavior and codependency. And, because someone had to spit in my face and tell me, like, listen, Matt, this whole nice guy thing that you're doing, like, it's a crock of shit, right? You know that you're pissed off about this and that, and you know that you don't like this, but you're not doing anything about it. And you're not asking for what you want openly and directly. Right. Exactly. And so not only was I a target for narcissism, but I also was, creating toxicity in potential healthy relationships. And I had to see that, and I had to sit with that, so a lot of educational pieces of what codependency is, what people pleasing behavior looks like, how it actually is manipulative, despite what you may have thought that, I just want everyone to be happy. Is it, or is it that you're really just that, and I get pushed back from other therapists that it's a trauma response, and I get it. It's a trauma response. However, we're not supposed to stay in our trauma responses. Right. So we're not supposed to. Right. Exactly. No, you don't hear, and a lot of people push back and,
but you don't hear anyone advocating for someone to stay in a fight trauma response. I mean, when someone's stuck in a fight, you don't say like, oh, well, hey, it's just their trauma response. No, you would help them work through that, right? We're not.
Because it's not civilized, is it? We can't have people running around in a fight trauma response because it's open, it's annoying. But when you're in a fawn trauma response, everybody's like, oh, just let them.
Right, exactly. So
they're only fucking their own lives up.
Right, exactly. But then, they think that, right? People will say like, yeah, it's only me but that's actually not true, because then you start talking about the resentment that they feel. And then guess what? They start that resentment causes so many divorces and breakups where that relationship could have had some potential, but because of your people pleasing behavior, and because you're not actually asking for the things that you want, and you now are resentful towards this person for not giving you what you want, it's literally, you're literally self-sabotaging that relationship.
What do you think it is in people that, you want to terminate the relationship with the narcissist, or you set a boundary with somebody and they're upset and they run away and they're crying and they're throwing a temper tantrum, and then we want desperately to go and make them better. You want to go and save the narcissist from themselves. You want to save the person who's hurt by your simple boundary. Why are we like that? What makes us do that?
Childhood. We felt responsible for our parents, okay. Right? Whether it be emotional, right? Depending on what type of you could have had a parent who was very either narcissistic or codependent on you, and you had to, let's say that you were the golden child, or you were the scapegoated child. Like let's just use the scapegoated child as an example. You never could do anything right as the scapegoated child, but you were always looking for that love from your parent. Always trying to please your narcissistic or your toxic parent, but nothing would ever work. Well, we mirror our romantic relationships after our childhood. Well, if you were in a scapegoated situation and you felt like you always needed to please this parent, then naturally you're going to find someone that's very similar to that, and you're going to overly do it, right? Mm-hmm. To try, this person is upset. I got to fix this. I got to make this right. Not understanding that because of this lack of self-awareness, I keep coming back to that it won't work, right? It didn't work when you were a kid. It's not going to work now, right? And
so you're telling people to give up on that hope that it's going to work?
Not necessarily. Some situations, people are trying to fix something that what I tell people is that if we understand boundaries, we have to understand who's responsible for what. I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for the things that I'm bringing to the relationship. I'll take care of me for you. You take care of you for me. What I'm telling people is that if this relationship is going to work, you have to allow for that person to take responsibility for their emotions too. Some people might do that. Some people might not. And then based on the boundaries that you've set, you can collect data and you can make a better, well-informed decision on if this relationship if this will work or if this won't.
My last question for you, and I think a lot of people will have this question, is if, for example, I was in what I suspect is a narcissistically abusive relationship, but I can't prove it, and also I'm inside of it, so I can't diagnose it. And you were advising me, at what point in that person's behavior should I be saying enough is enough, drawing that boundary and saying, right, I'm out of the relationship?
So I never tell people where their boundaries lie, because all we're going to do is create another codependent relationship where you're codependent on me to tell you what to do. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people is that you have to set better boundaries with that person, and outside of physical abuse and things like that. And then obviously there's nothing really, not much to talk about. But you have to be able to. You have to take care of yourself first. You have to become authentic with this person first and heal yourself first. And the more self-love that you introduce to your relationship, it's either going to make the relationship better or it's going to make it worse. Self-love makes healthy relationships better, and learn how to communicate better, and learn how to set boundaries better. And if this person is narcissistic and toxic, not only are your boundaries going to really, really enrage right? But it's also, you're also going to have a better self-awareness of where your limits lie, of what are my, I tell people to do an inventory. If everything in the relationship that you're in, nothing ever changes, right? Because you can't change the other person. That's one of the questions I get a lot. You can't change the other person. So if nothing in the relationship changes, would you want to stay in this relationship? All you can do is change yourself, accept the other person's behavior, or leave the relationship. And so when you start to let go of that control and you start to collect the data of that relationship, what do you see? Is that something that is acceptable to you? Do you like being treated this way? Right? And if the answer is no, right, and you start to see that you letting go of this control and you start to see this person isn't changing, nothing's changing, at that point, you have to reevaluate what is your breaking point, right? Because everyone's breaking point is going to be very, very different.
Yeah. I think that's a good answer. I also wondered if you were going to say that self-love in the participants improves a good relationship. Were you going to say self-love destroys a toxic relationship? If
people execute.
Okay.
Yeah, because toxicity and self-love, they just don't mix. Because toxicity comes from, even narcissism. A lot of people think that narcissists are these overly confident people when it's actually the opposite. They're highly, highly insecure. And so people who, self-love and insecurity don't mix. And so, like I was saying earlier, with congruency, that when we don't have self-love, we'll begin to self-sabotage the relationships around us. Well, if you're engaging, if you learn self-love concepts, and if you're building yourself up, and this doesn't inspire change in the other person because of their own insecurities, guess what? You're going to start to see the behavior of them self-destructing the relationship because that relationship doesn't match how they feel about themselves internally. They feel like shit. Meanwhile, you're building yourself up. You're trying to go to the gym, better yourself. You're trying to, I'm using the gym as an example. You're reading, you're setting better boundaries. Someone who doesn't want to engage in that type of stuff and is insecure, it's going to challenge that. Who are you going to the gym for? Because it's all going to come from a place of insecurity. And so the two just won't match.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for that. Where's the predominant place you would like to send people to?
You can find me anywhere. So whatever your preference is, you can find anything that you need to find about me on my website, mattpfeifercoaching.com. And from there, you can follow whatever rabbit hole you want to go down: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
I really thought you were going to say Spotify, Apple Pie then. Do you have a mailing list on mattpfeifer.com?
Yep. I have an emailing list. I also have a community group, community membership where, so for example, you're going to be on my podcast on Thursday. People who are part of my membership, they would be able to listen to that podcast live. And then afterwards, they get to ask the two of us questions based on some things that sometimes I might even ask the question that they have right on the air. But they get to participate in the Q&A afterwards. So people
who wanted to engage in that community, they would go to your website, mattpfeifercoaching.com, join your mailing list, and then they would find out how to join that community and join us on the Q&A.
They can sign up for the community immediately. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called the Toxic Triumph Community, and so there's a lot of different benefits that they get with that. Discounts on my courses, a lot of free webinars, a lot of I also have a premium podcast that only people that are part of that community get to listen to, and so there's a lot of benefits to being a part of it. And so, we have a little bit of everything on there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Matt. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely.